You hear it all the time on the news, right? GDP is up, GDP is down. It feels like it's the one number that everyone, especially economists, is totally obsessed with. But what is gross domestic product, actually? Well, today we're going to break it all down. So, we're told the US economy is worth something like $27 trillion. Just stop and think about that number for a second. It's so massive, it's almost meaningless, right? How in the world do you even calculate a number that big? And what is it really telling us about the country? Okay, let's try a little analogy to make this easier. Picture the entire economy of a country, say the United States, as one gigantic supermarket. Everything that gets produced and sold, every finished product and every service, from a brand new car to your haircut to a rocket ship, it all gets scanned at one massive checkout counter. Well, GDP is just the grand total on that final receipt for the year. So, here's our plan for today. We're going to start with what that grand total really means. Then we'll get into the actual formula economists use to add it all up. We'll put some real numbers on the board to see how different countries stack up. And we'll finish with what might be the most important part, the story that GDP can't tell us. All right, first up, an economy's grand total. We're about to look at the official definition. And trust me, every single word here counts. Okay, here it is, the official textbook definition. GDP is the total market value of all final goods and services produced within a country's borders in a specific time period. I know, that is a mouthful. But like I said, every part of that sentence is super important, so let's unpack it piece by piece. Let's think of it as 4 key ingredients. First, market value. That just means we use prices, dollars and cents, so we can add up completely different things like iPhones and oranges. Second, and this one is critical, we only count final goods. Think about it. We count the finished car you buy, but not the steel, the tires, and the glass that went into making it. Why? To avoid counting the value of that steel twice. Third, within a country. This is pretty simple. If a car is made in a Honda factory in Ohio, it counts towards US GDP, not Japan's. And finally, it's always measured over a specific time, usually every 3 months, that's a quarter, or for the whole year. So how do we actually get to that $27 trillion number? It's not like someone is running around with a clipboard, right? Well, economists have a pretty slick formula for it, and it's all about following the money. And there it is, the famous equation. GDP equals C plus I plus G plus the quantity X minus M. It's called the expenditure approach, which is just a fancy way of saying if you add up all the spending in an economy, it has to equal the value of everything that was produced. So let's meet the letters. First up is C, and that stands for consumption. Basically, this is all of us, you and me, buying stuff. It's the groceries we buy, the new pair of sneakers, even your Netflix subscription. In most countries, and especially in the US, this is the biggest piece of the pie by a long shot. Next, we have I for investment. Now, this is the one that often trips people up. In the world of GDP, investment doesn't mean you buying some stocks. That's just swapping money around. For GDP, investment is when businesses spend money. Think about a company building a brand new factory or buying a whole new computer system. It's all about spending that's going to help them produce more stuff in the future. G is for government. This is pretty much what it sounds like. All the money spent by the government, federal, state, and local, on goods and services. So things like military defense, building new roads, or paying the salaries of public school teachers. What it doesn't include are things like Social Security checks, because that's just a transfer of money. No new good or service was actually produced. And finally, we have that little bit in parentheses, X minus M, which stands for net exports. It's simple. We take all the stuff we sell to other countries, our exports, X, and we subtract all the stuff we buy from other countries, our imports, M. If that final number is negative, like it usually is for the US, it means we bought more from the world than we sold to it, and that's called a trade deficit. And when you put it all together for the US economy, you can really see just how dominant that C for consumer spending is. Look at that. It's roughly 70% of our entire economy. That's why you always hear news anchors talking about the health of the American consumer. Government spending and business investment make up most of the rest, and then you see that little negative slice for net exports. Okay, enough with the letters and formulas. Let's put some actual real-world numbers on the board to get a feel for the massive scale we're talking about here. So there it is again. $27 trillion. That's what you get when you add up all the CIG and net exports. It's the biggest economy in the world, but how does it really stack up against the competition? As you can see here, the US is still sitting in that #1 spot when it comes to the raw size of its economy. But wow,
Look at how China has rocketed into the number 2 position. And then you have other economic powerhouses like Germany and Japan right behind. Now, this number we're looking at is called nominal GDP, but there's a catch.
And this is a really, really important point. There's a difference between nominal and real GDP. Nominal is just the raw number using today's prices. But the economy could look like it's growing just because prices went up, inflation. So economists adjust for that inflation to get what they call real GDP. And that's the number that tells us if we're actually producing more stuff than we did last year. It's the one they almost always focus on.
Okay, so let's dig a little deeper now. Beyond just that one giant headline number, what can GDP really tell us about a country's progress and the lives of its people? This is so important to understand. A country can have a gigantic total GDP, like China. But because its population is so huge, the amount of GDP per person or per capita is actually much lower. Then you have a smaller country, like Switzerland. Its total GDP is way smaller, but its GDP per capita is one of the highest in the world, which suggests a really high average standard of living. Another thing you'll always hear about is the GDP growth rate. The best way to think about this is like an economy speedometer. It just tells you how fast it's expanding. So you'll often see developing economies like India and China with these really high growth rates, while a big mature economy like the US grows a lot slower. It's important to remember, though, a high speed doesn't mean a big car. It just means it's growing quickly from whatever size it is now. And this brings us to our final and honestly probably the most important section of this whole explainer. For all its power as a measurement, there is so much that GDP just completely misses. This quote is just incredible. It's from Simon Kuznets. And who was he? He was the economist who literally invented the concept of GDP back in the 1930s. And even she warned against using it as a measure of a nation's well-being. From the very beginning, the creator of the tool told us this is not the whole picture. So what did he mean? Well, for one, GDP tells you the size of the whole economic pie, but it tells you nothing about how that pie is sliced. It completely ignores income inequality. It also completely ignores the enormous value of unpaid work, like a parent raising a child, or someone volunteering in their community. It doesn't subtract the costs of pollution or using up our natural resources, and it says absolutely nothing about our happiness, our health, or our quality of life. So, that leaves us with a pretty big, challenging question, doesn't it? We know that GDP is this incredibly powerful and useful tool for measuring economic output, but we also know it's a deeply incomplete story of a nation's progress. So if GDP isn't the final answer, what is? What other numbers should we be looking at to get the full picture? That's definitely something to think about.